Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Little. I'm here today with one of my favorite poker players in the world. We have Daniel Negreanu. He has 6 World Series of Poker bracelets. He's probably going to get 2 more this year. He was Player of the Year twice. He's won the Super High Roller Bowl. He's done it all in poker. He's currently, according to the Global Poker Index, the most popular poker player in the world by a mile. It's not even close. He has a very popular YouTube channel. He's a GG Pro. He's a great ambassador for poker, and I'm happy to have Daniel Negreanu here today.
Well, always a pleasure to speak with one of my favorite YouTube stars, Mr. Jonathan Little.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. We all appreciate you being here. The World Series Poker is here. World Series of Poker. The World Series of Poker is here. And I think I saw that you said that you plan to try to play 88 out of the 115 events. Why? Why are you crazy?
Well, here's the thing, right? When I make my schedule, I put out potential events that I may play, right? Now, if I were to play all those events, it would be the worst World Series in the history of poker, because it assumes things like I never make a day 2, right? That I never ever have any success through 7 weeks. So those are just ones where, say, for example, I'm in the 10K RAS, I bust and there's a 1500 PLO. Okay, I might play that. What I like to do, because we sell pieces at pokerstake.com, is I like to include all the events possible. And then when I sell the pieces, the ones that I don't play, people get refunded on.
So I have a piece of your action. I try to have a piece of your action every single year. I think it's not financial advice, but Daniel Negreanu action at no markup in the World Series of Poker is probably a good deal. What possesses you to sell a decent amount of your action at no markup?
Well, first and foremost, I don't need the money, right? And I always looked at markup, and I totally understand why people do it and need to do it. But for someone in my position, it felt like nickel and diming, because the purpose of me doing it wasn't to make money off of poker fans, right? I thought, when I started doing the vlogs in 2017, I said, I think of sports, right? And if you watch a team that's 1-7 and another one that's 2-8, is that a fun game to watch? Well, no, but it is when you have a little bit of money on it, right? So I thought by creating essentially the TV show, the YouTube show, the vlogs daily, giving people a chance, sometimes maybe they can tune out of what's happening in social media. And this is they can live vicariously through it. I thought, wow, how cool would it be if I can give people a little piece? And again, financially, it didn't make much of a difference to me. Yeah, I am giving up money. I am giving up equity. But last year, people bought into the World Series piece and didn't go so well, which is always possible.
So last year, I think you lost money, $1.1 million, a whole pile. What?
No, exactly. Yeah, but then, luckily for those that still had faith in the Super High Roller Bowl, I did sell a piece of that, and I cashed for $3.3 million. So was able to recoup for those people, but obviously not the World Series people. But I think that was the first year that, I don't know, maybe I've had smaller losses, I don't remember, but I haven't had a loss that big. And it really comes down to, you play the 250K once or twice and you play the high rollers. If you don't do well in those, $1 million isn't very much.
So funny enough, you had a bad World Series and you won a big tournament. I've actually done that before as well. I had a terrible World Series and I won a WPT right after. And I think a lot of people who have not gone through crazy swings in poker struggle with showing up and playing sane every day when things are going horribly wrong. And explain how that feels when you do show up and you just kind of get crapped on and you have to show up the next day. What keeps you motivated to show up and play your best? Because like you said, you don't necessarily need to do it for the money. Why do you do it?
Yeah, I was talking to Eric Wasserson about that. He thinks I love the pain. I don't know if I agree with that, but it's sort of it's a theory that could hold some weight. But you're right. I'm human and I live my emotions. I experience them in the moment. I'm fine with that. But I went through about a 2-week period at the World Series where, I'm not even making it up. I have video. I didn't win any all-ins. I was how do you win it? I was so frustrated because I'm how am I supposed to win if I lose every time I go all in? And it wasn't I was going all in with, the worst hand. I had the best of it almost every time. So then what I do is this. I've always been very resilient, and very self-motivated, and I put a lot of pressure on myself, and I do love it. And I sort of enjoy the grind of getting back out there and giving it a go. But I have a little bit of a checklist, which I'll share if you don't mind.
Sure.
I ask myself, if I'm losing, I ask myself a few questions. Am I getting it in bad pre-flop? Okay, no. Am I bluffing it off too much? No. Am I calling it off too much? No. Am I getting so short that I'm just not really picking up spots and not having big stacks and things like that? And if the answer to all those questions is no, right? Then I'm okay, well then hang in there, buddy. Have some faith. You're doing the right things. You got it in ahead 3-1 for the chip lead. Didn't work your way this time. But as long as it's not a case of looking back at the sessions and going, yeah, I did pay off 80% of my stack in that spot. And so So that's what I do. And I really, that's how I gauge after all these years with the experience, how well am I playing right now? It's independent of results. I could be playing poorly and winning, and I know that, and then you do as well as a professional, which that's, there's not many, I think, endeavors that's true.
So imagine you go through that checklist and you do see that you did something wrong in your mind after the fact. Now, to be fair, maybe you're supposed to call off with the second nuts and the guy has the nuts and you lose, right? Like that happens. But what happens if you think you played poorly? What do you do to show back up ready to play the next day? Because a lot of people get really down when they screw up because they realize you're going to get unlucky sometimes, right? That happens. But you don't necessarily have to play poorly.
So what's interesting, and I don't know if this is the mindset that most people have, but I kind of get excited about it, frankly. Whenever I have some sort of a breakdown or a hole or a leak, I'm like, aha, they're just not paying me off ever. Nobody's calling me. So it must mean I'm not bluffing enough. Like there's spots here that I'm not taking. I need to start taking those. So I'll always be introspective and think about new ways, new lines, new approaches, different things I can do, because I've always been more of an exploitative mind, right? I did study, game theory and, did sort of relatively high level playing heads up, but I've understood that my skill level or my edge has always been understanding how people perceive me and then finding ways to exploit. So whenever I notice things are not going well, it's an opportunity for me to go, okay, what can I open up here? What can I do differently that maybe, I wasn't thinking about in the moment?
And that's what I think a lot of people do who succeed at a high level. They realize I am losing for some reason. Okay, I made this mistake. I lost for this reason. And I need to figure out how to take advantage of it in the future, right? Like if you are blinding down, you're folding too often, well, you're probably getting bluffed too often, right? Or the opposite. If you're always calling off and losing, you're probably a calling station, right? And so
it's funny you mentioned calling station because
oh boy,
if people are okay, there was a hand against you where I was really disappointed in myself. I think it was the 50K. I made a big mistake by letting you win a pot because I went through it and I had a natural bluff. I had 9-10 of spades. The board was like ace, king, queen, 8, and there were 2 spades on the turn, and even the 8 was not a spade. So like I blocked 8-9 suited, and I bet turn, and you checked the river, and I went through in my head when you called turn, like I thought, oh no, I think Jonathan might be a little bit stationy in this spot. So I elected to not go with the GTO approved move, and I checked it back, and you would have folded for sure. It was ace queen. You had queen 10. You could never call. But so I was really disappointed, and that's an example, right, where it's like I ended up busting that tournament later, getting it in. But like that was a key pot that I'm supposed to win, but made a miscalculation in the situation.
It's a tough thing though because I could have just had a hand I'm not folding, right?
But the thing is I have to give you, the thing is, I'm not sure, like, I don't play with you enough. I'm not totally sure how you perceive me in terms of my bluffing, right? So if I had you pegged as somebody who thinks Daniel never bluffs, I'm never checking that. But I was thinking, you've watched enough of my videos, you've seen enough of the moves, if you will, that if you had an ace specifically, you might call. But I remember specifically in that situation, essentially your range was capped. It was you raise the cutoff, I 3-bet the button, you just call. And it was like king, queen, 8, check, check. Turn the ace, check, I bet third pot, river and 8, you checked, and I had 9-10 of spades, and it was like, check. It was so stupid. It was just like, even if you do call, it's like, what I really should have done there was put you to the test, even if you do have an ace, and just like make an overbet.
Yeah.
I don't think you can call. Like,
it's going to put me in a bad spot, and I don't have very many trips, and you will have some, and maybe you have straight sometimes, right?
Well, like I said, I had the 8-9, I had the 9 of spades, so I blocked 8-9 suited, so you didn't 4-bet me. I can mostly rule out aces and kings and queens. And, it's just going to be a tough call for you. But I chickened out. And,
well, you got to play better next time. You can't play great all the time.
And next time, I'm just going to bluff you like crazy.
If you've watched this channel, you know that I am a bit of a calling station. I do not like folding, but I would have folded the queen 10 there.
See, that's what I'm saying. I was right about that. I was like, shit, I should bet here. But Jonathan's curious.
So, look, a lot of people are going to the World Series for the first time, and they are going to make all sorts of mistakes, both at and away from the table. So for people who are kind of good at poker, they're watching this channel, they're not total novices, right? What few pieces of advice would you give them to avoid the common pitfalls that you think most people who are serious recreational players going to the World Series are going to encounter?
All right, I'm going to give 2 separate pieces of advice for the 2 different groups that you sort of mentioned, right? People that are coming up for the first time, maybe recreational players, not professionals, not trying to be, but want to actually enjoy the experience. I say first and foremost, have fun. Like really just soak it in, listen, understand that it's, an entertainment. Like you're probably going to lose. It's just true. Most tournaments, like if you only play three tournaments, the chances that you actually win money after 3 tournaments is low, right? Because it's, the nature of the beast. So have fun with it. When you get in there, just play your game. Like, don't be intimidated, right? Like, you play the way you play. Don't think that, all of a sudden, I'm sitting next to Jonathan Little, I got to change my game. Do what you do best. Do what you know. A lot of people always ask me that question, like, what do I need to do differently? I said, it's too late for that, right? Yeah. Now, if you are somebody who's going out there with, maybe like a limited bankroll who does want to do this professionally, now you have to monitor yourself in a very different way. You have to be much more mindful of your bankroll, of the stakes that you're playing, making sure that you're finding yourself in tournaments that are like really good value, right? Maybe playing, satellites or some events at different properties that are smaller and things like that, but really sort of map it out. And I would suggest this, if you are going to go for a week or two, map it out now, okay? You don't have to stick to it, right? But have an idea of what every day is going to look like for you roughly. So that way you don't wake up in the morning going, oh no, where do I go? Where do I play? Have a map it out and really sort of think about how you want to approach it.
For sure. And you mentioned it, but you need to prepare ahead of time, right? You need to study ahead of time, get good at poker before you go, ideally, because once you're there, there's not a whole lot you can do beyond show up, play, ready to play, and then play your best. Because
that's where I go with during play isn't the time to learn. That's not the time to try things out. Like, go with what you got, right? You're like, this is the game I got. This is the game I'm going to bring. I'm going to do my best with it. When the series is over, you can look back and go, all right, there are some areas I can improve upon. You get in the lab, if you will, you study, and you give it your best shot next time.
I'm not sure how many people know this, but your first cash at the World Series, as far as I know, was back in 1998 in a 2K pot limit hold'em tournament, and you won it somehow. Sounds like a miracle, like Chris Moneymaker story. So what was the World Series of Poker like back then, and how was that experience of winning the first tournament you cashed in at the World Series?
So the World Series of Poker, interestingly enough, it was the late 90s, as you said. I first went out there in 96 and played Satellites the year Huck Seed won. Couldn't get into the main. I remember taking this. It still pains to me to this day. Like, there was 11 seats given away. I came 13th, going broke with aces. Wah, wah. But it's funny when, you're only 21, 22, that one stings.
And you remember it forever.
Of course. And then I went back in 97, still wasn't able to, afford it, because back then, guys, what you don't realize is the smallest tournament was a 2K. There was no $400, $300 gladiator type stuff, right? So what we did, if you were, want to be part of the World Series experience, was you played the super satellites for the main, or you played the one tables to try to get into events. So I was on a short bankroll playing 10, 20, 20, 40 limit hold'em. I found myself 3-handed in a satellite with Todd Brunson and Mike Matiso in a game I'd never played before, pot limit hold'em. Played no limit, played limit. So we get heads up, and Todd throws, he says, you want to save 500 or something like that when we're 3-handed. I say, sure. I beat him. I actually got lucky. I had king jack, he had king queen. He threw me the 500 and said, I'll take a piece of you tomorrow. Well, I wasn't going to play because I had $2,800 to my name. But Todd Brunson just said he has enough faith in my game that he thinks I should play. So, of course, I do jump in the event, and I'd had some success. I'd won a tournament in 3 straight stops in California, Foxwoods, Atlantic City back then. And then I remember just making the money, thinking, wow, this is cool. 2 tables, winning a flip. All right. And, making the final table. And it was all sort of like surreal, because at the time I was the youngest player to ever win a World Series of Poker, and I was 1-0. And I thought, wow, this is easy. So I'm just going to win like a couple bracelets every year and have 100 by the time I'm 40. It didn't work out that way.
You mentioned you had $2,800 to your name, but you had won 3 tournaments previously. Where'd all your money go?
Good question. So I would go to LA with like 30,000. I'd win a tournament or something. And I win in the cash games, and somehow I only had 15,000 left. I made bad decisions in trusting people back then and staking people, and I was kind of an easy mark, if you will. There's a lot of like quote unquote hustlers back in the day who I would stake in cash or tournaments, and so I was making bad decisions with the money that I was making, which was all part of the. I don't regret it. I don't regret it because I learned my lesson, but basically that's where it went. Just helping everybody.
It's interesting. I think a lot of poker players go through this where, if lending money or buying people's action, whatever goes fine in the beginning, they're stuck for a long time. But if it goes poorly right off the bat, they're just kind of done with it. I got lucky in that I taught a guy to play poker a long time ago when I was 18. I bought him a computer. I gave him $1,000 to play online. And then he promptly moved 5 states away and never talked to me again. So I got robbed right off the bat when I was 18 for a computer and $1,000, and giving people my money has fortunately not been my problem.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, here's the thing. I grew up in a different time before online poker. And, I was just very new to the scene. I was traveling by myself and making friends and here and that. And again, like, I was obviously an up and comer and other people saw me and they need money. So they're like, let me be nice to that kid and see if I can get staked.
Yeah, it's a tough thing because like if you never need to get a loan or get a stake, you in turn don't really need to give the loans and stakes. But at the same time, if like maybe you're traveling and you don't have a ton of money, or maybe you're, trying to grow your bankroll as fast as possible, which will mean you're going to lose sometimes. Maybe you need the stakes. So it's almost like part of the deal to some extent.
It is like in the world that I live in too, when you talk about high stakes, like sometimes, if you're, well, I don't travel as much, but like you're traveling different locations, you need 50,000 or something for a buy-in. You see a guy there and there's kind of it's kind of an unwritten rule where like there's some trust there. Although now, to be honest with you, even at those stakes, it's much easier to pay that debt immediately because most people deal in crypto to some degree. So if someone needs 50K cash, they're like, all right, I'll send you, a couple Bitcoin or whatever.
So the world has changed a lot. That was not a thing back then. And poker has changed a ton, right? And a lot of players from 1998 are no longer in the poker space today because presumably they ran out of money or something else. But you're still here and you are still at the top. What I want to know and what everybody wants to know is what makes you special and unique to the point that you have found a way to consistently stay at the top.
Number one is I love it. I just love it. I look forward to the World Series. I'm twiddling my thumbs. I can't wait, right? That's number one. Number two, and this is going to sound, people are going to go like, you? No, it's self-awareness and humility. I know that sounds crazy for someone to say, in my shoes, but it's true in the sense that like, I always have a healthy respect for the younger generation and my peers. Rather than do what, when I was young and up and comer, I remember the Tom McAvoys and the Brad Dohertys, they'd like scoff at me, this aggressive kid, he's going to go broke, right? I don't do that. I look at what they're doing. I look at the Michael Addamo, who is, in my mind, probably the latest of the kind of new age, unique players. And I always want to know and understand, like, what are they doing? I hired people to help me learn how to use solvers and understand game theory. So I've always, every couple of years at the very least, kind of been introspective and say, all right, I like where my game's at, but there's areas to improve. And one of the ways to do that is to learn things from others and sort of incorporate that. I think it's like a deadly combination when you take someone like me who has 30 years of experience or what, how many is it? 30? Yeah, 30 years of experience playing this game exploitatively and then teach him, the theory behind all this stuff. Now what I do is I essentially try to understand the theory and figure out how people misapply it. Because I think the dangerous thing people do is they see what a solve says and go, oh, that's the right play. I'm like, but is it? Is there anything deeper that you can look to? Because it's a crutch. And sometimes when you make the correct theoretical play, it's an absolute punt of all punts.
Well, especially in a tournament, right?
Yeah, no question about it, right? So for example, you're playing in a tournament and that, at 10 big blinds, if somebody shoves a small blind, the range you're supposed to call with, and it's pretty wide, right? And that's true. But if you just did that and didn't factor in the fact that the player who went all in on the small blind is the biggest nit of all time, and you decide, well, king six off is a defend. No, it's really not against this player. You have to learn to adjust your calling and, ranges against players like that.
Also in a tournament, you just want to survive, right? So imagine whatever, king six is the worst hand you're supposed to call with on a GTO calling chart, but 2/3 of the field is gone. You should be folding because there's value in just hanging out. And
sure,
I think a lot of people misapply going for thin value bets on the river and going for big hero calls and big bluffs on the river because they're usually barely profitable, right? And if it's barely profitable, it's not worth taking a risk for a bunch of your chips.
Well, you bring up a really important point that I discussed in a video recently that I think a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people study pre-flop and flop because that is kind of the easiest streets to do. It gets more complex on turn and river. So people will look at the flop and they'll be like, all right, against the quarter pot c-bet, I should defend with like ace 10 on queen 9-4, right? They like say, for example, just throwing it out there. So you're supposed to defend here, like, because it's worth 0.06 of a big blind, for example, right? Now, here's the thing. It's worth 0.06 of a big blind to a solver because guess what? The solver will play the turn and the river perfectly. You will not. You will not. So the question is this a compounding error, right? Where just because it says for the solver it's plus EV, it doesn't mean it's plus EV for you if you're not going to be able to navigate the turn and the river, optimally, which again, most people won't. So sometimes I will make folds on the flop that I know are solver approved calls because I don't want to find myself, especially like you said, in tournaments, in difficult spots where, I might go broke.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get it in their heads that they are better at poker than they actually are, and they think their opponents are worse than poker than they actually are a lot of the time. And I think that leads to them in that spot thinking, well, it's barely profitable because, well, so I can call because they are going to play worse than the solver, without really realizing that they are going to play worse than the solver too. And it gets them in trouble. But I mean, like going back to the way you were thinking about improving your skills, you realize that you are not 100% perfect poker player, right? I mean, you're obviously literally one of the best in the world, maybe the best in the world, but there's still a lot of room for improvement, even for you. And
no, exactly. It's the moment you stop thinking that you need to improve that you get surpassed. And I remember, on this sort of topic, in terms of what you said about, everyone thinks everyone else sucks. Ted Forrest used to say to me, most people compare their A game to everybody's F game, right? They're like, you see a guy play a hand terribly, like, oh my God, did you see that call Jonathan made? Well, how bad was that? And then, they have this whole idea about like, that's encompasses all of who you are and how you play, which is a huge mistake that you can use to exploit other people.
I mean, it's especially true if you see me hero call you with that queen 10 from earlier with like a really bad hero call on the river, let's just say. Then you may think I'm the biggest calling station in the world, but maybe that was 1 in a million, right? For whatever reason, I decided to put the money in.
Example. If I would have bluffed there for pot size bet and you called with queen 10, the first thought that's going to go to my head is never, ever bluff Jonathan ever again in a million years. Okay? Don't do it, right?
Yeah. I mean, some people take that concept to the extreme and they'll make poor decisions with the idea that I think I'm going to make a poor decision now, so my opponent now thinks that in this case I'm a super duper calling station, and now I can just fold every time they bet the river. But I'm not so sure that necessarily applies. I mean, you may see that thing, but I don't know how long it's going to stick in your head. I don't know how long you're going to remember it, and are we even going to have a spot like that in the future for me to take advantage of it? And a lot of people make these advertising plays, especially in casual home games, thinking they're going to capitalize, but I'm not sure that's the case. What do you think?
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point, because essentially what you're doing is creating a psychological leveling war, right? Where it's like, oh my God, he just showed like a really big bluff, or he called me really light. Is he going to continue to do that? Or is he doing that so that he'll think this and that, right? So essentially it doesn't make it any easier necessarily when you're playing against thinking players. I do think there's value against, some weaker recreationals and stuff like that, creating an image that you can later exploit. But at the higher levels, like, you end up often leveling yourself into making mistakes.
So I kind of view you as one of the like best leveling people and best table talking people. Yet here you are saying that you have to be careful against good people, right? Because who knows what they're doing? And that's also something a lot of people don't realize. They think they know what their opponents are doing, but very often they just don't. I mean, they're doing something, but you don't know what they're doing. I mean, the other day in the heads up match, you got leveled kind of nicely. Remember that one with the Jack 10?
Oh, he leveled me a bunch of times.
Eric Person we're talking about somehow leveled you a ton. It didn't help me, still lost.
Oh, Eric he table talks a lot too, right? So some of the things he says, right? If you look at past video, when he says this, he has it. And, he was doing the same thing when he didn't. So he's conscious of what he's doing and what he's giving off. And I think if you are going to enter that world of psychological warfare, you have to be very cognizant of, the things you've done in the past. I'll give you a perfect example if that's okay.
Yeah.
Martin Zamani got me so good in the PLO tournament at the Poker Go studio. It was a hand where I was bluffing the river. The board came like queen high, turn was an ace, turn was a king, river was an ace. And I bet river representing 10 jack. And he tanked for almost 2 minutes. He looked over at me and he's like, you got to give me something. I said, what do you have? Like ace queen or something? And he's like, historically, when you call people's hand, that means you're bluffing and you can't beat it. I call. I'm like, oh my God, he watches way too much video. So I got totally owned because he did his homework.
So that makes me think the right situation against most people, especially the more casual, talkative players, not casual meaning like bad player, but the looser players as opposed to stoic players, is to just sit there and be quiet and don't say anything.
No question. When I play against Phil Ivey, you will not see me say anything because he knows me so well. We go way back. And it's not like I'm ever going to be able to out-talk him. All I'm going to be doing if I talk to Phil Ivey is like telling him what I have. He knows me too well.
But then that extrapolates to apparently Zamani and maybe Person and who knows who else, right? And it's unfortunate because the table talk makes at least televised poker a whole lot more fun and actually playing poker a whole lot more fun. But now here you are kind of incentivized, because you don't want to lose money, to not table talk so much. That's
the thing though. See, that was on me. Like I take responsibility for that mistake because I I didn't figure out Martin Zamani well enough to know that like he watches a lot of poker on TV, right? So when someone watches a lot of poker on TV, a lot of my tricks they're going to have seen. So I have to be thoughtful of that and not, and maybe break up the pattern or like you said, just don't say anything in those spots.
Yeah, I mean, I always recommend that to people who are not world-class table talkers. Just sit there and be quiet when you're in a hand. You can talk when you're not in a hand. You'll be okay. But they think they're going to be able to level their opponent. I don't know why they think that, even though they don't even know the opponent. And I think a lot of people think they know things that they just cannot know and do not know. It gets them in trouble in all aspects of life. So speaking of televised poker, I think you said a while back that televised poker should be more like professional wrestling and a little bit less like golf. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, ish, for sure.
Ish, okay. Not trying to take your words out of context.
No.
Poker has definitely aired towards professional wrestling over the last few weeks, I think. And where is the line is the question. What is acceptable at and away from the table? Whether it is legitimately malicious or whether it is purely to get attention and eyeballs on you. Like, what is acceptable behavior today? Because in professional wrestling, anything goes, I think.
Well, here's the thing. I think we dip way below the line, right? And that's kind of why I said ish, because here's what I think. Like the wrestling thing, the banter, the back and forths, the rivalries, all good and well. But once you start drawing when you start to get to like personal attacks on people's character and, throwing out words like scammer and fraud or, these kind of things, I think we've devolved into something that's become nasty. And any sort of mob think group activity against one person, like we saw, kind of with Berkey when he played on that live stream recently, I think it just felt very high school. Like, I think you can sort of incorporate characters, fun. Like if you look at Jungle Man, right? He's incorporating WWE stuff, but that's because he's wearing a costume. He wears a costume and plays a character. That's like, he's like, oh yeah, I'm Macho Man, Randy Savage, and he embraces it. And it's fun. And Jungle's just being Jungle. Ultimately, I think what sells best is when people are being genuine and authentic to who they are. And I get it. Listen, if people are playing in high roller tournaments, they're not there to entertain. They're not there to be a circus clown. They're there to win the money. So they're not there to put on a clown suit or something like that. But if you are on a made for TV event and you're invited to it, I do think there's some responsibility of like adding to it and contributing by being entertaining in some way.
For sure. It's tough, I think, because a lot of people may be unaware of things they do that potentially offend other people. And nowadays on the internet, you can offend anybody with anything. For example, yesterday you wore a big muscle suit when you played against person because person has big muscles. But what if somehow, some way, person's actually really ashamed and embarrassed of his muscles because they're not big enough, and now you're making fun of his muscles. And now you've offended him. And now he gets mad at you. I'm not saying this is what's happening, but imagine like that happens. And now you got the bodybuilder community getting mad at you on the internet. And next thing you know, you're banned for wearing a muscle suit. That's obviously a joke.
Yeah, that expands past just poker and sort of the world we're living in with an uber sensitivity to certain things and people being offended on others' behalf. It makes me think of years ago on the NBC Heads Up. I played against Scotty Nguyen. And I dressed like Scotty, put a mullet, did the chains, and I can do a pretty good Scotty impersonation, right? So Scotty loved it. He embraced it. We laughed. We had beers. We're good friends, right? People outside of that were letting me know how offensive that is to Scotty. But I'm like, Scotty's fine with it. Similar to the Eric Person, example. I knew he's a good sport, so I knew I could bring out the fingers. I brought out these big foam fingers like this to him because he did that to Helmuth. And it's all in good fun and it's good natured. And I think here's what I think we lose in our society now is intent, right? When I did that thing with Scotty, was there any sort of racial undertones or demeaning behavior? Was that true with Eric Person? No, it's all about having fun. And I think right now, in our culture, there's a little bit of a hypersensitivity to looking for things, looking for reasons to be offended, even when the party being sort of, poked fun at is laughing along with the joke.
Yeah, it's a rough thing because maybe the party being joked at is laughing along with it and perfectly cool with it, but maybe people like that person or not for whatever reason, and that's where it's tough because you can make people mad for all sorts of reasons. Some people don't like me and I try to be nice to everybody, and it's a rough space.
Well, I know that people today don't believe intent matters, and I totally disagree with that ideology. I really think if you have, for example, a 75-year-old man from Texas and he goes to a restaurant and the waitress comes by and he says, "Oh, hey, honey, you look lovely today. Can I get some more sugar?" Right? We know now that, using the word honey and speaking to a woman in that way is considered somewhat, offensive, but do you think his intent was demeaning or whatever? He was being kind in his way. So we have to be more understanding and accepting of how rapidly things are changing, and that, you know, we should always question like people's intent behind anything that they did.
I just want to all be adults and love each other and get along. Let's just be adults, right? Come on, let's be adults. It's
I'm
not high
okay with
school
that.
anymore. Maybe it's still high school for some people, but it's not high school anymore. So
Yeah.
you're an ambassador for GG Poker, and every time I look at their site, they have tons of traffic, lots of big games, and that's good to see. And online poker, I feel, might be in a rough spot though, due to all sorts of other things like rake increases, like people using real-time assistance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to know what your future predictions are for online poker.
Well, it's very hard to say, right? I think online poker in one form or another is going to exist forever. Like, I think people enjoy it and whatnot. But you're right. You know, you bring up some important points specifically about our, AI. And how what we end up having now is we have a cat and mouse game, right? Of, the operators trying to catch the cheaters, and the cheaters trying to figure out how they're trying to catch them and get away with things. Because anytime you're talking about a game like poker or anything related to money, you're always going to have people that are dishonest. They're going to try to to catch you. GG, I think, is at the forefront of like catching people. Like about a year and a half ago, I think two now, we banned about, I think it was between 60 and 150 accounts that, we figured out were doing some things that were nefarious. But yeah, as people get better in online poker, it's very data driven. I think having a fair balance where everyone's has access to the same data, which you do, within the software, you can sort of see your poker craft, if you will. And see statistics on other opponents. I think that's levels the playing field to a certain degree. But you're right. Listen, at the high stakes games don't run unless you're able to bring in a player that others feel there's value in, right? So if you look at high stakes poker, GG is really the only place that has regular high stakes poker. So why is that? Why would be the reason that GG has it? Because they have access and they have ways of bringing in, quote unquote, the fun players. And then the pros play. Because what we don't see anywhere is you don't see pro on pro, reg on reg action like we used to 5-10 years ago. That doesn't exist. Those days, I think, are gone, right? Because now people look at it and like, yeah, there's no point in playing against a crusher, right? And, both of us paying rake, we need somebody to sort of support the game. And if they don't exist, then, you don't have a game. And that's true not only of high stakes, but all games. All games are created that way.
Definitely. So I know a while back you played like 100, 200 for a while online. I know you've been practicing heads up a lot for the heads up match you played against Folk a while back. And I've always liked the idea of sitting down, spending a lot of time learning a specific form of poker. Back when I was a kid, I would spend 6 months learning a new game like PLO or stud or whatever and just play it a ton. And those two games in particular, I think, online cash games and also heads up are really, really good for making you good at no limit hold'em, especially deep stack no limit hold'em. And I was wondering if you could give us a few things that you learned recently in the process of trying to improve your skills that maybe you are applying wrong, because maybe I'm applying it wrong and everybody else is applying it wrong.
You bring up a good point, specifically about heads up poker. Because here's the thing. It's almost like when you play heads up, you're filling your plate with a bunch of food that's like, overloaded. You've got so much on your plate, right?
Well, because ranges are super duper wide, right? So you have to be in there with a lot of hands.
You're on the flop thinking, okay, this person could have queen 3 offsuit, right? When you're playing 8-handed, you don't have to worry about under the gun having queen 3 offsuit. You can narrow the range down, which makes the calculations much easier, counting the combinations and the value and the bluffs. It's so much simpler when you can narrow a range down. So essentially, it's as though you're training your muscle by taking on something so much more complex. And then what I do from that is extrapolate, towards, to sort of figure out how to play against even tighter ranges. It just makes it a little bit easier. So essentially, learning how to play heads up well at an elite level is far more complex in some ways than ring. Obviously, the one aspect of ring is when you have multi-way pots, there's all this extra stuff to think about. But overall, being able to define hand ranges is so much easier 8-handed, than it is when like, a guy's opening button with like 9-6 off. Like, it's just, it becomes a much more. So I found by studying that very hard, I was able to extrapolate a lot of what I learned there to, playing ring games and tournaments and stuff.
I think we've seen just historically a lot of players who started playing heads up and got to decently high levels heads up have become very good full ring and tournament players because they're used to more difficult situations, right? They're used to playing much wider ranges, and when you cut the range down by half, it becomes simpler, right? And it's easier for those players. I don't think we've seen a whole lot of players go from playing mostly nine-handed poker to heads up, though, because it's very difficult to do that because you're used to playing whatever 20% of hands. Now you got to play 80%, and it's a big adjustment and a big ask for someone who's used to playing kind of good hands most of the time, now having to play a lot of junk.
Yeah. So to answer your question sort of before too, is about like one thing I pulled out from it big time was, like you said, when you play 8 or 9 handed by the river, ranges are pretty narrow and people just usually have a pretty good hand if they've called the bet on the flop and the turn, right? So you don't bluff as much, right? Because you're up against, stronger ranges. When you're heads up, probably the one thing that was like shocking to me is how often the computer wants you to bluff. It wants you to bluff a lot more than most any human is comfortable with, right? You're gonna be like, are you kidding me? I have to go 3x pot here? This is insane, with these crazy hands. It's like when you go from ring game poker to heads up, I think that's probably one of the biggest eye-opening experiences with understanding from a balance perspective. It makes sense, right? Like somebody bets the river, they have to be able, for you to ever call them, they have to be bluffing at a decent clip too. And if they're not, you can just fold every time and you print EV if you don't have the nuts.
It's also interesting you mentioned the drastic overpots that you see happen at heads up way more than most other forms of poker. And I think that's because a lot of heads up players have studied the river more. They get to the river way more than full ring players because they play more hands and they play wider ranges. And therefore, they study the river more and they see a lot of these spots where you should be overpotting it on the river. And that's something you see a lot of like really good online players doing, and also a lot of really good heads up players doing that a lot of more, let's call it full ring players, do not do.
I think you're right. It starts on turn too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you see a lot of turnover bets in spots where, often like, you're up against like cap kind of ranges, that allows you to sort of bet bigger. And then, like you said, obviously on the river, one thing, we sort of touched on this earlier, like the human brain will never be able to mimic a solver, because even with solvers, here's the thing that's important to know. I know, like, say, for example, when you do a sol, you put in a small size, a big size, and an overbet. And you ask the computer, which of these 3 things would you do, sir? And it sort of gives you, of the 3 things you ask, what it would do. But optimally, the solver may choose something completely outside of that. So let's say, for example, the biggest bet you gave it was 1.5 times pot. But you also, let's say, for example, said, what about 6x pot? Maybe it chooses that, right? But it's impossible for us to put in every possible sizing range. So the whole idea behind solver use is it gives us an idea of what the solver is wanting us to do. It wants us to make a small bet, a big bet, or an overbet. And we kind of have to extrapolate from that and humanize it, right? Where we figure out a limited number of sizes. But understand, solvers aren't limited. They can literally pull out any size out of their butt or out of their, computer, whatever you call the inner workings of a computer.
And very often they do. So what I typically do is we'll run the spot using some more common sizes. And if you see the solver use mostly the big bets, then you just have to rerun it, but with more and bigger bets, right? And then see what you're looking at then. And sometimes it uses huge bets, like you say, and that's a lot of fun.
That's a really smart way to do it. That's a very smart way to do it. And that's particularly what I think Michael Addamo was doing, frankly, because he brought, everyone thinks this is GTO poker, right? Because everyone's using the same sizes, 1/3, 2/3, 1.5. I'm like, yeah, but there's other sizes that can be GTO too. And I think Addamo spent a lot of time working with totally different sizes and learning those at a high level. So then when people approach it, they don't know how to deal with it. It's like, wait a minute, he c-bet 150% pot. Like what? Nobody does that. He c-bet 300%. Like, what do I do against that? And if you're not familiar with it, that's why I think there's some value in sort of not too much, but like coming up with your own sizes. Because if you're just using the sizes that everybody learns in all the different study programs, it's like, you're making life a little bit easy on.
Yeah, no, look, I've never talked strategy with Addamo, but what I have to imagine he's doing is he is using lots of big size options, but also adjusting what the opponent against the solver does against those big size options. And I got to presume he is saying that you're going to overfold to those big size options. Because I think most people fold whenever you put in the 2x pot turn bet with middle pair, right? Whereas maybe you're supposed to be calling with middle pair a lot.
Right? Well, that's the thing.
It depends. Right? It depends on the scenario.
Right. By the function of the way poker works, right? The larger the bet, the stronger the hand you need to call.
Sure.
Right? So if there's $1,000 in the pot and someone bets $1, okay, I'll call you with a pair of deuces. Fine, right? You're probably going to lose.
Three high, I think.
Yeah, but you know what? It's $1, right? So you could win 1,000. You're getting 1,001. Why not? But if there's now 1,000 in the pot and someone bets 50,000, right? Well, now you can't just call with like a pair of deuces. That's kind of suicidal unless you know for certain that that player is bluffing too often, right? So it becomes, again, a little bit of a leveling war. And Michael Addamo, I think, did a really good job employing different sizes that mess people's brains up.
Yeah, I mean, I can guarantee whenever you start putting out 2-pot bets on the turn with a lot of money left on the river, people fold too often because they don't want to face a big river bet. And so
but then you have some others who are like, screw this guy. I'm sick of these big bets. I'm going to call. And then he shows the nuts and you're like, oh, I have a pair of sixes, right? So you
remember that time you called him early in some big tournament and he just like showed you the nuts and you had ace king or something and it's just like an easy call against him, I think, but he just had the nuts and you lost and everyone's like, why would Negreanu call here? But the answer is because he does this stuff all the time.
It was an interesting pot. Actually, I did the solve, right? And the play he made on the river was a 22 big blind mistake, according to the solver. But he's smarter than that. He basically bet 3x pot with a hand that he's never supposed to do that with ever, really. And, not for that size. But he correctly deduced that I was going to overcall in this spot against him and I wasn't going to be pushed around. So he just went for it. That's probably one of the best things I learned from Addamo is, so say, for example, there's a spot where if you bet a third pot, like the guy was probably going to call you, right? And if you bet like 3x pot, they're probably going to fold. But you know what? If they do call, once in a while, that's worth risking the 1/3 pot. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, you got to keep him honest.
Guarantee 1/3, but you could just really go for it. And he did in that spot. So he basically doubled up in a spot where no other player would have, because no other player would have bet that size.
Also, maybe he just knows that some people overfold and some people overcall. And guy who's not playing for the money, who's trying to win the tournament, that might be the guy you want to go for full value against because he's not going to fold.
Well, that's where poker gets fun, right? I've had historically an image of being a freaking payoff station. He also knows that. He's like, maybe D-Negs will find the call. I'll jam it in his face. Okay, it worked. Congrats. But I got him the next year. I did bust him the next year. Trapped him good. He tried to bluff me this time. Not going to work.
So a lot of people would have lost the first one where you hero called with whatever bluff catcher. And then now they're going to be terrified to call him ever again in the future. But that would be ridiculous, right? Because he is going to bluff sometimes if he's good, and he is good.
Well, this is the thing, right? If you took your average player and they bet 3, I wouldn't have called with ace king. I'm just going to fold because not many players have the guts or to put in a $250,000 buy-in tournament in level 1 to just be like, YOLO, I'm ripping it, right? Most people are just going to have it, right? So I would fold against almost everyone except that gentleman. He's earned calls against me. Because it's funny, after he did that, people are like, oh, how could you call, Daniel? How could you call? About an hour later, he ran almost the identical same hand and he bluffed Jake Schindler doing the exact same thing. So it's like, haha, this is why I call, because he bluffs sometimes.
He probably got called against you and got the fold against Schindler and he won all the money probably, right? Easy game, right? Sometimes it lines up.
He did both.
I will say though, whenever you use a style that puts yourself all in a lot, both with value and with bluffs, you're going to have big swings. I think a lot of people see the very, very battling type players and they think that is exciting poker, and it is exciting poker, don't get me wrong, but I'm sure Addamo has gone on some big upswings and some big downswings, but probably bigger than me because I'm a little bit on the more cautious side. I'm not all in every other hand.
The last time I was in Cabo playing the GG World Series of Poker, Addamo was in a 25K with us, and they show you on the software, like someone's in for their second bullet, third bullet, and we were like in level 3, I think, or level 4. It wasn't very long in the tournament. Maybe we were playing an hour and 15, and it said Michael Addamo 8. He was in for 8 bullets in like an hour. So you're absolutely right. Somebody who plays that, live by the sword, die by the sword style, it's not for the faint of heart, to say the least.
So we talked about the leak of loaning money a little bit earlier. Maybe it's not even a leak necessarily, but I realize, because I get a lot of comments on this channel, some people have all sorts of leaks and they struggle with plugging them, whether they be playing poker strategy, whether it's partying too much, whatever. They have problems. So I'm wondering if you ever had any sort of major leak that could have derailed you as a person or a poker player, and how did you fix it? Or maybe you've never had any.
I would say probably the season, right when season 1 of WPT, right?
When was that?
Oh, 2002, 2003.
Okay.
So season 1, really, this big new thing, this poker's on TV. Everyone's like, whoa, this is great. I thought maybe, I would be one of the prominent figures and on the show and, make some final tables. So I learned one of my leaks and I actually made rules for myself after the fact. we'd go to these different stops, right? Go to Atlantic City. All right, let's go have some drinks. We'll go to the bar, have fun with people, shoot the shit, if you will. And now it's like 6 a.m. I'm like drunk. I go to sleep and the tournament starts at noon and I show up. And by 2 o'clock, I'm just like in a spot where the guy bets. And I'm like, okay, so I'm just deducing his range. And I'm part of my calculation is, all right, he might have this, but also if I call and lose, I can go to sleep. So wasn't ideal. So what I essentially made, I made rules for myself right after that, because I realized like I sabotaged myself. I didn't give myself the best opportunity. I wasn't behaving like a professional, right? So I said, okay, night before tournaments, no alcohol whatsoever. No going to dinner with people to tempt myself. Stay in my room, get 8 hours of sleep, make sure I'm eating well, and really, really focus like I'm supposed to. And in season 2, I had like back-to-back wins essentially. I think it was season 2 and 3. I don't remember, but I started to do really, really well. And part of it was just taking it seriously, but it had sometimes, in order for leaks to really scream at you, they have to sort of scream at you. You sort of have to hit rock bottom to a certain degree and realize like, I just blew this whole season. And this was a good opportunity, I thought, for me to sort of make a name for myself in poker. And instead, I'm just at the bar at 6 a.m. with a bunch of people wasting time.
Yeah, would you rather be the champion or at the bar at nighttime? You kind of get to pick to some extent.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people will hear that and they'll think, okay, imagine they have the exact same league. They go out and they go party after the tournament. But these are more recreational players who go to poker to have fun, like you said, right? They go to the World Series, they play a tournament, they want to go hang out with their friends. Next thing you know, it's 6 a.m. And they do this maybe once every 4 or 5 months, and they don't think it's that big of a deal. But at the same time, it is a big deal, and they're squandering their opportunities. And I wonder if they either just don't care about poker as much as they think they do, or they're unaware of their leak, or I don't know. I'm always trying to help these people improve their skills, right? And I think a lot of people just really don't have their priorities right. You realize your priority was not to hang out and have fun all night. Your priority is to win at poker. Period.
Mm-hmm. So it's 2 words: clear intention is what I call it, and something that I sort of learned and studied. It's an emotion, it's an EQ type buzzword, and essentially what it is before you go to this tournament, what is your intention for this tournament? Like getting absolutely clear, write it out, whatever the case may be. Okay, my intention is to go have fun. Cool, then do what you're doing. If that's the case, great. If you're saying my intention is to do really well in this tournament and focus on doing my best, and I believe that will be fun, right? Totally different statement. And now what I would do is I'd create a roadmap. What sort of game plan? What behaviors are conducive to me being aligned with what I state with my stated intention, right? So if I go to Mississippi and I say, I'm going to go there and I'm going to win the WPT, right? Is drinking the night before conducive to that? No. Is booking a flight on day 3? No. Is not sleeping? No. All those things are not. So what I try to do is make the intention clear, figure out what behaviors will work, stick with those. And I know that if I stick with my behaviors in the long run, that's going to work out. And obviously sometimes I still don't win the tournament, which is okay. But as long as I look back and I say, okay, if I didn't win the tournament, what worked? What didn't work? Okay. What worked is, okay, I went to bed at a reasonable hour. I didn't party, et cetera, et cetera. What didn't work? I don't know, maybe it was distracted, maybe it was on my phone too much, things like that. And then I will adjust that for the next one and sort of recreate a new kind of intention statement with a little roadmap of what specific keys I need to stick to. And then when it's over, if you didn't succeed or didn't do it, look back at your checklist and then you can sort of point to why, right? Sometimes it'll be because you got aces cracked, whatever. But ask yourself, if you did all the right things, be proud of that. Be proud of the fact that you stuck to your guns, you did what you said, and enjoy the process.
I always recommend poker players get a hobby that is not so results oriented or full of variance like poker is, right? And things like going to the gym. Pretty good hobby because you can kind of control the results within reason, right? Or just living a healthy lifestyle, going to bed on time, eating right when you're playing poker. These are things you can definitively control. And if you do them right, you should be happy, even if poker does not go well, because poker's not going to go well a lot of the time. How it goes.
Yeah, so that's the hard part, right? So like if you set an intention, for example, I want to lose 20 pounds in the last 6 months, right? Like kind of like what Sean Deeb is doing, right? So that's very easy and it's very analytically easily driven, right? Because you can say, okay, this is the goal. This is what I will need to do to get there. And you can follow that roadmap, right?
I don't think that's going to be easy.
Well, no, I understand. But then, for 20 pounds in 6 months, it's doable, right?
Sure.
So if you follow you follow the steps, you get there. Obviously, you'll have some sidetracked issues. Maybe you get sick or whatever the case may be. But that's one where you can definitively say, I did everything right and I achieved the goal, right? Poker doesn't quite work like that, but it doesn't mean the process doesn't work, right? Because you can do everything right and still lose. And that's incredibly frustrating. But all you can, I mean, in my opinion, this is the way I approach it, all I can really do is focus on my behaviors and my actions and my own checklist and ask myself, am I doing all the things that I said? So if I said going into the World Series, I'm going to watch 2 hours of poker, I'm going to study and all that stuff, and I do all that and I do everything right and I get all the sleep, and it's a bad World Series in terms of results, I'll look back and say what worked, what didn't, right? Okay, I did all the things I said. Well, what more can I add? Is there anything else that I can look at that I can improve upon? And now every year I look to improve upon things, and I've got ideas for this year even in terms of, you know, subtle things I want to improve upon.
You're always improving. That's how you stay at the top, I suppose, right? You don't get happy with your current situation. You're always trying to do better.
Yeah. You know, people ask me now, like the question, you know, how would I do against the version of myself from 2004, right?
You would smash him, I'm sure.
In 2004, I won everything. I was winning I won WPT Player of the Year, World Series Player of the Year. I won like 4.4 million in tournaments, and the biggest event was 10K. You know, I was crushing it, right? But having said that, back then, my edge against the field was drastic. I was much better than everybody else, okay? Today, I'm not. Today, I'm, you know, amongst, you know, the best, but there are plenty of players better, and, you know, I'm in that group, and I don't have as big of an edge. However, the me now would absolutely destroy that old me. That old me in today's climate, again, high stakes poker games, has no chance to win, right? And that's hard for people to understand in terms of like how the game's evolved and how you have to keep evolving with it.
Is that not kind of a negative towards the future of high stakes poker then, if you are now just as good as every other good player and, you know, plus or minus a few percent, because that means there's essentially no edge, right?
There is an edge, right? So, because you know, here's the thing, you're going to have in these fields, you're going to have some players that are not professional, right? So let's say, for example, you had a field of 40 players, okay? 35 pros and 5 bad players that are definitely like losers, okay? So those 5 players will lose money, right? Maybe the top 10 pros who thought they were good enough to win, maybe they don't, right? So now you leave about 20 to 25 guys who will all make money to different varying degrees, right? Now, this falls apart when you don't have those 5. If those
That's
5,
the fear. What happens when those 5 lose their money or lose their interest?
Well, what we're seeing, I mean, I look at the Triton today. The Triton's going on right now. There's a 25K going on in Cyprus. They have 150 players. Seeing actually more interest in a wider group of people who want to get involved in high stakes poker. So as of right now, poker's hot, you know, but again, there'll be ebbs and flows in that because generally speaking, people don't enjoy losing, right? So if you lose consistently over and over and over without any sort of wins or winning moments, it can turn you on the game when you're like, yeah, I hate this. I'm sick of it.
All right, we're almost out of time. I'm inspired by Rob Young's speed round the other day he did with Jason Koons. Let's do a speed round. Answer these questions quickly if you do not mind. Okay? What means more to you today? World Series of Poker bracelets, World Series of Poker Player of the Year, or profit?
World Series of Poker Player of the Year.
Has anyone won it 3 times yet?
I sort of did, but then they stripped it from me.
Oh, well, you got to try again, I guess. How many people do you think will be in this year's main event, 2023, for those watching and listening later?
I think it will be I don't know, remember what the all-time record was, but 200 more than the all-time record.
That's confidence. You really do think poker is hot, huh?
I do.
Everyone watching, let us know in the comments section below if you think it'll be more or less. Who is a player that we may not know who we should make sure to follow this summer?
Let's go with Jesse Lonis.
There you
Jesse
go.
Lonis, a good young player.
When you go to the World Series, what is your favorite snack food to eat during the day?
Wow.
And where can we buy it? Because I know it's not in regular stores.
It's definitely going to be chocolate. Various forms of chocolate. Give me all. Put it in my veins. Let's go.
What is your favorite poker game to play?
Stud 8 or better, but I prefer playing a full mix of games like Dealer's Choice.
In a Dealer's Choice game, what's your least favorite game to play?
I can't tell you because everybody will call it.
Well, tell me who would always call it. Who is the toughest mixed game opponent you will play against?
I would say in Dealer's Choice, Adam Friedman is very adept at playing all the games well and figuring out what you don't and calling that.
Who's been your toughest no limit opponent recently?
Recently, toughest no limit.
Because there's a lot of tough opponents, right?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Huh? Who's my toughest recent no limit opponent? There's definitely names. Can't think of who. I think Foxen's up there. Oh, it's Foxen.
Foxen likes to make you put money in the pot.
Foxen, he's intense for sure.
Yeah, he used to be a little bit too insane, but I think he's gotten like a little bit more tight aggressive, and that's made him substantially better, I think, because now he's not drastically over bluffing.
Yeah, I just think he's overall good. Like, period. Like I like his style. I like his approach. I play very differently than he does, but I admire it from afar.
What is your favorite hand to stack people with?
It's got to be 6-4 suited.
Oh, all right. Nice one. They never see that one coming.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to win the Stanley Cup?
Well, I picked the Dallas Stars before the playoffs started, so I'll stick with that pick.
You still like them?
Yeah, I think they'll probably win.
All right. Who is your favorite person to watch play televised poker today?
Phil Hellmuth by a mile. I sit there with popcorn, just hoping somebody actually beats him a hand, and then watch the rant unfold. It's hilarious.
I don't think a lot of people necessarily know that Phil's rants are not malicious. I think they think that he's...
Yeah, a lot of people internally vent, and they say a lot of things in their brain. It's a freaking idiot, but just Phil does. He just has that. He just says it out loud. He's got no filter.
In a hypothetical, no limit event, would you rather be allowed to never raise post flop or have to use Alan Kessler's pre-flop strategy on every hand throughout the tournament?
Say the first part again.
No raising post flop or Alan Kessler pre-flop strategy.
I don't raise post flop anyway, so that's fine. That's my style anyway. But I don't want to play Alan Kessler style.
You're the next Alan Kessler. We heard it here. In 5 words or less, what makes poker such a great game?
Level, fair, unbound, level, fair competition for all.
Perfectly 5 words. Good. That's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it. Where do you want to direct the traffic here? All the people here, what do you want them to go check out to learn more about you or the things that you are involved with currently?
Well, I'll tell you what, guys. Once the World Series of Poker starts, you can check out my channel on YouTube, and I do a daily World Series of Poker vlog. So if you can just put my name in, and I'm sure my YouTube channel comes out. So subscribe to that. You'll get one in the morning, like clockwork, every day throughout the entire series. So about 7 weeks.
How much effort does it take to make that? Because you put out the vlog every day. It's a ton. It's actually an insane clip, especially given you're playing poker all day every day.
Well, the good news is I obviously don't do the editing. The way we set it up is I have a vlog phone, which is essentially which is just an iPhone. It goes to an iCloud. All the clips that I shoot go into the vlog, so I don't have them edit anything. I don't like shoot 8 minutes of something and go, okay, make that. I only shoot the 30 seconds and that's what goes in, or the 12 seconds. And so then I have my guy Christian sort of set it up with the music. I have a team in Korea who overnight, it's daytime there, so they're all in the office. They spruce it up, and when I'm asleep, I wake up in the morning, it's already done for me.
You got it figured out. All right, well, make sure you check out Daniel's YouTube channel. I have some of your action this summer. Let's hope you win. If you lose, that's okay too. I wish you the best of luck. Thank you for being such an amazing ambassador for poker, and good luck at the series.
All right, bud. Appreciate it. Good luck to you too.
Thank you.